Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we are going to be talking about selecting an audience, a priority audience, according to the new version of your book, for your campaign. And the really important point I want to make about this is I want you to notice that you're selecting an audience before you even decide what you want them to do. So I know that it can be confusing because the last thing that you were asked to do is, well, one of the last things you were asked to do is figure out some sort of purpose, right? What is your campaign supposed to do? And a lot of those purposes, right, were linked to some sort of behavior, like I want people to eat more fruits and veg, or increase the amount of fruit and vegetable intake, or decrease carbon emissions, or um, you know, we kept using the COVID examples, decrease the transmission of, COVID, right? All of these different things, and obviously everything's tied back to behavior. That's what social marketing is. It's about changing a behavior. But what I think is really important to understand is, remember, when you go back to those steps of social marketing, um, before you decide exactly what you want to ask people to do in order to get to that goal, right? Like, if you want to decrease the transmission of COVID, there's lots of behaviors you could do. You could ask people to wear a mask or wash their hands, right? There's all different types, stay at home, whatever the case is, right? There's all different types of behaviors. But before you decide what you want people to do, you need to decide who you're going to target. Because obviously, certain people are going to respond differently to different types of behavioral recommendations. So what I really love about this, actually, if you think about it, is that the steps of social marketing, it, by putting your selection of the audience ahead of the behavior, to me, it's essentially saying you need to think about who needs this intervention and who can best affect the behavior. And then you can decide what specifically you're going to ask people to do, right? But to me, it's kind of in a weird way, maybe I'm like being too romantic about it, but it always strikes me as kind of a person first orientation. And I know there's practical reasons for it. I'm like trying to convince myself right now. Obviously, I know there are practical reasons for it, but there's something to me that's very progressive about that, to say, like, okay, let's first think about the people that we're trying to reach. And then once we know who we're trying to reach, then we're going to tailor this whole campaign to them and their needs and their psychology, right? So that's the whole point. I'm sorry. I'm not, I got one of the pugs with me. But he's the one making that noise. I didn't want you to, I was teaching a class, an undergraduate class, and I guess I'm so used to their noise. He was like sleeping or something, and my students like thought I was passing gas or something because it sounded so horrible. And the other one's barking now, but shh. If I have to, I'll edit this out later, but hopefully they'll shut up and I don't have to go put them away. Okay, so here, look, as usual, I'm going to try to simplify things in your book to only what I want you to know and what I want you to like sort of focus on for your worksheet. Your book lists a lot of different considerations you should take into consideration when you're picking the audience for your campaign. And I really think you should read that. And if you can integrate those things, I want you to. But at bare minimum, here's what I want from you this week. First of all, I know you already think you know who your audience is, but I really want you to try to get out of that. Like, I want you to realize that there are lots of potentially good audiences. And I hope you're a little torn, actually. It's like, well, should I focus on these people or not? The whole reason we're even doing this sort of segmenting anyway, and we're not focusing on everyone, is because that's inefficient. People watch different types of media, right? You can reach them in different ways. They have different issues, right? Psychological issues or environmental issues that make them respond to different types of issues in different ways. I mean, I always, like, just because of my job, right? We always talk about undergraduate students and how different they are from the rest of the population. And if I was doing a campaign to reduce the spread of COVID, I would target them completely differently, right? Just students in college. Much differently than I would target a group of, 30 somethings in Manhattan. That was random. Well, not as random as you think, because my brother-in-law is a 30 something in Manhattan, so I don't know. But you get my point, meaning like they're just they respond to different things. They've got their different life stages. There's all sorts of reasons. So I really want you to think, like, depending on your issue, who are all the different potential audiences that you could reach to that could help you get to your purpose, to get your sole objective of the campaign that you listed a couple weeks ago. And the way I want you to describe them is in terms of demographics. So demographics are like things like age, race, maybe some of the things like developmental, like you could say college students, but I would still want you to say like college, because college students are different than even like vocational students or whatever. I don't know. Maybe that was a bad example, but it depends on the issue. It really does. But race, sex or gender, things like that would be considered like basic demographic requirements. I was about to say geography, but your book puts that in its own category, which is fair. So first describe, what these people look like in terms of like the boxes that they would check on a particular survey, right? And let me just like stop there to go on a tangent. Don't make this too broad, right? Remember, the whole point is to segment. So in the past, I've had students that'll be like, okay, I want to reduce the incidence of skin cancer, right? And so I want to target all women ages 18 to 45. And I'm like, ooh, 18 to 45, you've got a lot of different people in that mix, right? Maybe you just want to focus on, you want to try to figure out groups that have something in common. It's not to say that you don't want to reach out to 18 to 25 year olds, and you'd also want to reach out to 35 to 45 year olds. But you don't want to put them in the same box because there's so many differences, right? That in terms of where they are in life and things like that. It's hard for me to think about. There are so many potential audiences out there, and they're so specific to the types of projects you're doing. This is where your research is really going to come in hand and help you, I think. But the point is remind yourself that the point is to narrow down a segment to focus on, not reach everyone, because that's inefficient, okay? So I want you to describe them in terms of demographics, geographics. You might, by the way, if you're doing a campaign to reduce some sort of cancer, you might want to focus on everybody in the United States. That would be fine. But if there's like some specific problem, like in West Virginia, right? West Virginia and a couple other states like Mississippi, I think, have like higher rates of obesity, and they have higher rates of smoking and different risk factors for things like, I don't know, like lung cancer, for instance, right? So you might want to say, like, if there's a problem that affects a particular geographic area, like a state or even a county, you might want to say, I want to focus on this demographic of people within this, a smaller geographic location. And then the other thing that I want you to think about is just, your book calls it psychographics. I think lifestyle factors, and I kind of just mentioned that already, right? So smoking would be like a psychographic, like different things that, it could be more psychological based too, like the fact, like women who are planning on getting pregnant. Have you ever heard that? It's like this category. It's like, well, they're not pregnant yet, but they're planning on it, right? That's like something going on that you can target those people, and advertisers do it all the time, right? Because you understand that's where they're at, right? That would be a psychographic type of consideration. But you can tell, obviously, like, pregnancy is not a relevant demographic, or willingness to get, or wanting to get pregnant, whatever, is not a demographic that is going to be useful to all of you, depending on what you're doing. So you really got to think about, like, well, what are the lifestyle issues that are going to have some particular relevance to the purpose that you're striving toward. And then, and this is key, this will help you. Hopefully you will come up with at least two, I say. So maybe just do two, that's fine. But at least two, and then I gave you some limit on the worksheet, maybe up to 4 or 5. But at least 2 different audiences. And they don't have to differ a lot. I want you to hear me on this. They could differ on just one of those elements, right? So maybe you're saying, look, I really just want to focus on maybe you're trying to reduce like the incidence of distracted driving, okay? And you're like, look, I really think that this is only a problem in my state. Fine. But I'm really debating, like, should I focus on teenagers or should I focus on their parents? Good question, actually. Like, do you want a campaign that's trying to tell the parents how to like deal with something, or do you want a campaign that's trying to deal with the teenagers? But all the other demographics are the same. You're focusing on, upper middle class, suburban white people in I don't know wherever. Do you get what I'm saying though? It's like you'll have to figure out what the problem is, and maybe it's only one of those things that you're kind of like debating on. So the next step that you need to do is use some of the your book gives how many? I'm looking at the book right now. It gives 9 criteria that you can compare those two different things, those two different priority audiences on, and say, okay, how do parents and children compare in terms of, um, you know, I'm trying to pick one that I'm not making you talk about, but I can't. Never mind. Never mind. We'll go through it like okay. So I wanted you to. Sorry, it's called a reverse sneeze. It's another pug noise. Hopefully he's fine. It just they get like saliva in their nose or something because their noses are like pushed in. Okay, sorry. So what you want to do is I picked out 5 that I want you to consider from the book. And I'm actually looking at the new book right now on page 159. And I want you to go down and consider each of these criteria and compare if you have 2 audiences. So if I want to try to reach parents or teenagers to prevent, let's say, crashes caused by distracted driving. And obviously, you can tell I'm thinking about teenagers doing it, but that's not really fair because adults, bad distracted drivers. But fine, you want to decrease the deaths of people 18 and under, dying from distracted driving. Fine. Okay, so how do those 2 audiences compare in terms of size? Honestly, they're probably about the same. You could make the argument that, like, well, parents are more because there's usually 2 to every 1 child, but maybe there's as many kids as parents, so it all evens out fine. So they're about the same in terms of size. What about problem incidents? How much are these people contributing to the problem? So in that case, I could argue that they both kind of contribute the same amount too, in terms of that they could both fix it. Although clearly, if you're doing this campaign just to help teenagers because they have the issue, you can make the argument that, they contribute a little bit more to the problem. That's what problem incidence means. You want to say, like, how much does this audience contribute directly to the problem that's happening? So, okay, maybe teenagers get a little bit, higher marks in terms of the damage they're doing. Severity, right? So this is similar, but it's not like how much, but severity refers to consequences, right? And clearly the teenagers are the ones who you could say like have the most to lose because they would actually be the ones that you're concerned about losing their life, right? Again, assuming your purpose was to help the teenagers. This next one, though, is a very different question. What about responsiveness? Who's going to be more responsive to a campaign about stopping texting and driving or whatever you're going to end up focusing on? Well, in that case, I would argue the parents, right? Because we know that teenagers, their frontal lobes haven't developed. So I don't think they're going to be as responsive. They're not as willing to change as perhaps the parents would be, who are going to be motivated to maybe protect their children or protect themselves, right? And then there's the issue of reachability. Reachability refers to, like, can you actually use media messages in a campaign to connect with them? And in this case, I would argue that both audiences, right, parents and their children, would be equally easy to reach. But think about like other issues, right? If you're trying to target, let's say, homeless people, I know that's like what if you were doing a campaign because you wanted to try to convince homeless people to seek out medical care or whatever. It would be very hard to reach homeless people compared to some other audience that has, more regular access to media, has like standard addresses, things like that. Anyway, if we added all these up, like what I'm asking you to do in your paper is maybe do like a paragraph for each of these 5 criteria: size, problem incidence, severity, responsiveness, and then reachability, how easy they would be to reach. And I used to literally up into this semester have people actually like kind of like give the different audiences you're considering a score, and then add up that score. Your book actually does do that. If you want to see what that looks like, it's like a little worksheet. Actually, of course, I'm looking at the new book now. I'm just so excited I have the new book. I risked life and limb to go back to campus to get it. Now I want to use it all the time. Oh shoot! But I didn't. I think I actually have it written down on eCampus. Where is? They have so many charts in here. They all look the same. They're all blue. How am I supposed to find this? Okay. One of these figures actually has a thing where they like ranked it. Here's the important thing though, I'm not asking you to do that because I realized it was confusing people on what I want. Let me just say it as simply as possible. I want you to have at least 2 viable audiences that you're like, if I could reach either of these audiences, right, I think I could actually make an impact, a dent in my purpose. But then you can only focus on one. So in order to decide which one you want to focus on, I want you to write up an analysis, possibly with some of the research you've already done, right? But you could also do what I was doing, which is just kind of like, okay, let's be honest here. Teenagers and parents, right? They have different levels of receptivity or responsiveness to this issue. So explain that. I want you to explain why, even though both of these audiences would be great, the one that makes the most sense for this particular campaign is audience X, because compared to audience Y, they really don't meet the mark in terms of severity. Like it just doesn't affect them as much. Okay. So like in my skin cancer example earlier, right? You could say, well, look, young people are at risk for getting skin cancer later on, but we really think that your campaign people, all the people working underneath you, we really think that we need to target middle-aged people, middle-aged women, middle-aged whatever, because they're most affected by this issue. So, in that comparison, the weight goes towards this particular audience, okay? All of this, and I'll just say this and then I'll shut up, I promise. I want you to think about everything you're doing this semester as there's not necessarily always going to be right answers, right? It's not like, oh, this audience has to be the one you choose. Everything is about how you argue it, right? And what your book is doing is trying to give you ways of thinking and arguing, which is kind of the same, like you're arguing it to yourself, right? Ways of thinking about how to present this. And in your final project, right, I'm not going to care so much that you picked audience X over audience Y. What I'm going to be looking for is like, can you use the criteria? And you can use more than what I just gave you, but at bare minimum, can you use these 5 criteria to make a decision and show why one audience is exactly who you need to focus on? So the good news is like I said, it's not like you can do this wrong unless, right, you don't really think through the rationale for why you're doing it. So think and write. Okay, that's it. Already going longer than I wanted to, but if you have any questions, obviously, you know where to find me, back in the kitchen again. I'm actually shocked my husband hasn't interrupted us. I just have dog interruptions, so I feel like I better quit while I'm ahead. So, okay, well, thank you very much. I will look forward to seeing your audience selection. Bye.